So for those of you, we're all sort of audio guys who are into, what are the technical details of setting up Zoom. Actually, let's just talk for a couple of minutes about it, because I'm sure some of you guys are going to be teaching or doing presentations or performances as artists and musicians. And so it might be good to talk for a few minutes before I switch over to DP about the settings for Zoom, how I did that. So let's just talk about it for a minute. I'm going to screen share. And right now I'm in Zoom. I'm looking at the Zoom interface. Let's go to Preferences. Now, we've got my video camera here, of course. Now I want to talk about the audio. So many of you guys obviously have professional audio interfaces, and you want to use, I'm using this 414 microphone going into MOTU's 1248 audio interface, which is connected USB to the computer. Works great, great converters, sounds perfect. But when I select the microphone as the 1248, Zoom sees that the entire interface, that driver, as a mono input. So I was doing, when I was first getting into these webinars, I was sending all of my signals out mono. And some of the guys were saying, hey, there were veteran webinar guys who were saying, that's, it's not sounding very good. So I was thinking, well, that's bizarre. Well, I'm using this MOTU interface. Why isn't it seeing it that way? Well, come to find out that there's a program that I'm using, and there's probably a few programs like this on the market. But the program is called Loopback. And here's what I'm doing. I have basically created a bus inside my 1248. That's the audio interface. It has its own virtual routing where I can send audio into the mixing environment and I can send it into the computer. So these last channels, 17 and 18, that's the audio coming out of Digital Performer. That's my microphone being summed to this pair. And I'm basically creating a virtual routing pair into these output channels, just generically called channels 1 and 2. So now everything's coming out in stereo, and when I choose in Zoom the microphone for loopback, now there's a stereo signal coming into Zoom and my playback is stereo. So if I didn't have loopback, I would be coming in mono. So that's something I want you guys to be aware of, and I've kind of figured that out. So the good thing about loopback is once you set it up, it's just running in the background and it's good to go. Cool. So that's a little side story there on loopback. And in DP, what's great is that my outputs are going to my interface. So everything's going out to loopback and then going into. Now, another quick little side note, everything that you record in Zoom on video, the audio is mono. It's weird. Like they don't allow for stereo video recording. So what I'm doing is doing old school. I'm recording basically the audio from QuickTime. QuickTime Player has an audio recorder, and when I select the input from Loopback, I'm getting a stereo recording. So at the end, unfortunately, someone's Java will have to take the audio and remarry the video and sync it back up. So we want to have a good stereo recording of the audio. So we can obviously minimize that. So that's always fun technical stuff. So today's about ZTX, and I actually am really excited about it because I love the way these tools were implemented. Not only the sound of the tools, but just again, it's one thing to have great time stretching and stuff, but the way they put it in the program, you can really think musically, and I'll demonstrate that. So we're going to basically I've got maybe 5 or 6 different projects, because when I first, was talking about doing ZTX, a lot of people said, well, drums are one thing because they're very transient. That might be easier to actually quantize. What about things like acoustic guitars or pianos? And I have examples for everything. So we're going to get into how it does it. But let's break it all the way back down to, okay, how does it actually analyze the audio? Like what are we talking about here? So we're going to go up to Preferences in Digital Performer, and we're going to go over to Background Processing. So let's talk a little bit about background processing. Whenever you record audio, DP has to quickly analyze the waveform, and it has to sort of make note of and collect the data in the file. Like, what's the resolution? What's the sampling rate? What's the bit depth? Where did it start in its time location? What's the timestamp of the audio file? What's the waveform? But we can even add more sort of analysis work that can be done with the audio recording, and that is down below here. We're going to automatically analyze the beats in the tempo for this project, and then we can make it a default setting for new projects. So it seems like when DP, thinking how does DP speak, like whenever you're setting up things, it's going to give you the choice between the current project and then future projects. So don't be confused by that. It's just thinking this one and future ones. So I've got it set. All you have to do is background processing, make sure these are enabled, and then DP is going to automatically analyze the audio tempo information. So what does it look like when it analyzes it? So we're going to go into the sequence window. That's the best place to see when it's analyzed the audio. So we're going to go into this drum part here, the drum tracks, And right off the bat, you can see, okay, we've got the audio transients here, but we've got these shadows. And these shadows are the beats. This is what DP's done kind of behind the scenes very quickly. So, by the way, if you're recording a band, you've got 16 inputs, and you're recording at 24-bit, you might think, well, do I want to be analyzing the audio? The good news is that it happens very quickly. So if you really were being particular about it and you don't want to have any interruptions at all, it should really not get in the way. But if you're running a ton of things and you kind of feel like you could turn that off, do the recording, save, and then say, hey, analyze the audio. So you could always turn that preference back on. You could just go back to background processing and turn it off, do all your work, save, turn it back on. And whenever you turn it on, one thing you probably know the shortcut to, Shift-R, is the background processing window. So whenever you're doing something, you're rendering something, you're time stretching, and you kind of want to get a visual reference of how long it's taking, Shift-R is the background processing window. So it'll say, oh, it's analyzing beats, it's redrawing waveforms, it's telling you what's happening. And yes, you can kill background processing tasks. If you just can't wait, say, I don't really have time right now to deal with it, you can always highlight them and remove them and delete them and come back to it later if you wanted to. So that's something to keep in mind. And by the way, this information is always stored in the analysis files folder. So let's actually hide DP for a second, Command H. Here's my project. Here are the analysis files. So what is the analysis files? What's it saying? Well, there's the overview. And look, it's actually figured out the waveform at all these various buffer sizes. So that's something that it's done because if we're actually scaling the interface and we're looking at it at different zoom levels, DP's already pre-calculated what it's going to look like. So here's the good news. Like this entire analysis file folder for this entire project it's pretty large actually, 200 megabytes. Because there's quite a bit of information that's stored in that. But the good news is, if something is haywire, let's say, I don't know, the way it's seeing a particular file's tempo, the waveform is looking like a gray box. So every once in a while, you'll see these things happen. You're longtime DP users, you just see these things go on, and you go, what's the deal with this? Why is it acting like that? Well, I'll tell people, quit the project, toss the analysis files folder. Maybe put it in the trash, relaunch the project. It'll reanalyze everything. Give it a couple of minutes to do it, and then chances are, oh, all the waveforms are back, everything's behaving again. And so audio cache, we'll get into that stuff later, but let's just keep plowing into this. So we've talked about background processing, we've analyzed the beats, we're looking at a drum set. And so the first thing we're going to do is, and that's a common one, how do we quantize a drum set? Because remember, with drum set, we can't just quantize things individually. So right now, each of these elements of the kit, if you look over here, kick, snare, the top snare, bottom, hat, toms, and so on, overheads, it's found those transients, it's found the beats for every part of the kit, but they're not perfectly together necessarily. See how if you look very, very carefully, where it's seeing the beats in the kick drum is slightly different than the snare. So if I just simply highlight the snare drum part and I want to quantize, let's say bar 31, beat 4, the and of 4, if I quantize that, it's going to be not with the kit. It's going to be slightly away from the kit, and there's going to be smearing from the overheads. So obviously that we want to make sure we do a drum kit as one entity. So then it brings up the question, well, how do we treat the drum set as one entity when we've got all these different tracks? Well, the key to doing a drum set is to pick one element of the kit that's going to represent the kit. So what does that mean? If there's one microphone, like let's say, I found from checking out this demo that the hi-hat, believe it or not, is a good representation of the kit. It's rhythmic from the hi-hat itself. It's got snare bleed. It's got some kick bleed too. However the engineer set up the mic, hi-hat mic tends to be kind of bleedy mic anyway. So it's a good representation because the kick is too isolated and the snare is not picking it up of the other elements. So you'll just have to experiment with it to see what works best. But I found that the hat works pretty well for this example. So by the way, you see how this is a very lightly played drum kit. So I'm going to do, and this by the way came from my friend Andrew Jamez, who is an LA producer drummer, and he's got a studio. It's the Compound East LA. It's a very cool studio. So we're going to actually option drag, and we're going to zoom in so you can see these a little bit better. So, by the way, whenever you magnify a waveform, if you hold the Option key, it's going to do so for all the tracks. So keep that in mind. You can hold Option, we'll go all the way down, Option, we're going to scale it up. I want to see those things a little bit better. We can save that. By the way, these grid lines, let's say you're not in the grid mode and you don't really want to be irritated by seeing those grid lines. And every once in a while, you'll want to not look at those. So you'll go up to View, and you'll go to Grid, and say, yeah, I don't want to see the beat lines today. I just want to focus on other things. I don't want them to go away. I just don't want to see them. So, but we're going to obviously want to see those today for the demonstration. So we're going to go to View, Grid, Beat Lines. We're going to turn that on. We see all the beat lines. So we're not going to do the whole kit wholesale. In fact, my whole philosophy for beat detection is to kind of work in sections, you know, because one size will not fit all, especially when there's different syncopation or the drummer's playing something and he does a triplet fill versus something that's straight. So you're not going to, you know, it's not magical that way. You can't predict where there will be rhythmic changes. So you'll want to work kind of in sections. Hey, let's do the verse. Let's do 8 bars. And that way, hey, that sounds really good. Go to the next, because you know you'll get into a workflow where it does that. So I'm just going to cut. I'm going to highlight. Let's just zoom out a little bit. Command arrow keys will let me zoom here vertically or horizontally, I should say. So let's see. We're bar 31 through about bar 39. That's like an 8-bar section. So I'm going to highlight that. Command Y will make a cut. So now it's already highlighted. So I'll leave it highlighted so that I can go up to audio, audio beats, and now we're going to copy beats. So the whole kit's highlighted. We're going to copy beats. And now where are we going to copy the beats from? We're going to copy the beats from the hat. Okay, so now all I have to do is simply hit copy. Now you'll notice that all the shadows now for all the parts are being dictated by what it discovered in the hi-hat part. So now when it quantizes the whole kit, there's going to be those lines are the same across those subdivisions for all those instruments. So now all we have to do is, let's zoom in a little bit here so we can see things a little bit better. You'll notice that the shadows have improved. They're much more consistent now across the entire track. So what do I have to do now to quantize this? Well, a couple things I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure that I've got stretch turned on. Today's webinar is all about turning stretch on. So what is stretch? Stretch is this new algorithm. We talked about ZTX and beat detection 2.0. What are all these fancy marketing terms? What does that actually mean? It means now Digital Performer has the ability to quantize those beats, but it's not going to make a destructive edit. It's not going to just cut the audio and time stretch it. No, it's not. It's just going to leave the audio alone, but now it's going to look at the actual stretch, the beat, and it's going to move it and time stretch it for you. So that's what we want to do here. We want to turn on stretch. And then right next to stretch is something called cache. And so here's the idea here. When you use these time stretching features in DP, what's the algorithm that it's using? What's the quality of the algorithm? So let's look at that for a minute. Let's go into preferences and let's scroll to the bottom. And I want you guys to look at what we have here called pitch and stretch. Okay, so at the top, this is pure DSP. This is really about which algorithm are we going to use, okay? And here's the one thing I want you to be aware of. When you're doing pitch, okay, when you're doing vocal correction or you're doing something with pitch, the pitch, you're given the choice between using MOTU's pure DSP and the ZTX stuff for pitch. Now, believe it or not, I think I mentioned I gave a demo last week about pitch, and pure DSP from MOTU is very, very good. Still as good as it gets for doing 90% of your pitch correction stuff. But everything that's time stretching in DP now is always ZTX. You don't even have the choice. We actually went through the engineers and some of the guys at MOTU, we were shopping, as it were, for like a better algorithm. And we thought, well, could the brainiacs from MIT write their own? They could. Or we could see if we wanted to use the EarCam out of France, which was also very good. That's what we use in Mach 5, and they use it in Falcon. It's a very good time-stretching algorithm. And then Synaptic from Germany, there's this brilliant guy who makes these time-stretching tools, and we thought, you know what, listening tests, that was the best algorithm. So that's the one that we licensed with ZTX. So it's not ours, it's his algorithm. It's this brilliant guy, and so we put it in DP. So here's the question, what's the quality of it? Okay, so here's the current project. This is for new projects. So again, we always give you it's a little confusing at first. Why do I have two sets of settings here? Because we give you the option of doing it for the current project and also for new projects. So we're looking at the current projects. So when I'm doing playback of stretch, what's the quality of the algorithm? And that's what we're going to do here. When I time stretch and quantize the drums, it's going to use the algorithm. Well, what's the quality of the algorithm? You can see it's pretty low. And those don't cost very much in terms of processing power. And as we move our way up, it's going to tax the computer more. But if you have a very, very fast computer, you can set it as high as you want. Now, let's say, we don't, and these are actually very, very good. As you go down through these, I won't go through every one and say, this is designed for this, although solo really is designed for more, solo-oriented instruments. Let's say you're going to time stretch a solo cello. or something where something's very exposed, and it's something about the algorithm kind of can focus on that instrument more individually. Again, your mileage may vary. You'll just have to listen to it. And you can always switch this, by the way, as you're working. You might, what I've noticed on the lower algorithms, if I'm doing something with percussion, I might notice that there's a swishiness to a ride cymbal. And I'm like, ooh, I can hear the algorithm. It's just not quite perfect enough. So I'll go up, better bump it up a little bit. So let's say we bump it up to something like standard good. So then we were talking about cache. Well, what is cache? So, and we're going to come back to this window. So I've set it pretty high for actually playing back these changes. So you'll notice right next to stretch is something called cache. And that's basically, when you turn that on, DP will calculate what's needed for that pitch algorithm, and it'll store it in that cache. And what that means is it's not going to draw on the processor in real time and tax the computer. It's going to, when you're parked and you're sitting there waiting to play back, DP's done that calculation and it's stored that render in the buffer in cache. So, you know, again, it's a very tweaky thing. I kind of love that about MOTU. Like they're always doing these sort of very technical-minded things, like giving people the ability to turn on and off buffering something in a cache. But if you're not using super expensive ones, and this is just a laptop, I rarely turn it on, to be honest with you. Even when I use the more expensive ones, I rarely turn on cache. But you can, if your computer's really struggling, you've got all these things going on, you can turn that on. So, but what's the other setting here? So what's the difference between playback and offline? So offline would be if you do something where you want to actually, let me think about this for a second, because I just found out that bouncing to disk actually is not considered offline. A bounce to disk, even though it's faster than real time, is still a real-time path. This is all like super technical stuff that I don't want to have to bore everybody with, and I'm thinking out loud here, and you're like, what's going on here? Offline would be, I'll give you an example of offline. If you do scale time, okay, let's say I highlight a guitar part, and I want to scale the time. And I go up to region, and I'm going to scale time, and I'm going to make this, by the way, whenever I'm in the scale time window, I'm always dealing with the percentage. I almost never look at bars and beats and lengths. I always go, well, I want that audio guitar part to be 95% of its length. So when I do, that's considered offline. So now if I have it set to the maximum resolution, it's going to take quite a while to actually do that render. And so what are the settings for offline? If we go back to preferences, offline, I could set it all the way to the very top. And so now if I want to pick a guitar part, and it's this beautiful, clean guitar, nylon string thing, whatever, and it's going to sound amazing. You want to slow it down just a little bit. And you go up to region, and you're going to scale time, and you're going to make it just a little bit slower. I would do offline at the very best and hit done, and then go warm up a cup of coffee and come back in 3 or 4 minutes, and it'll be rendered and done. So that's the thinking here. But what we're going to do today is we're just going to play it back. We're just going to be using the playback quality. We'll set it pretty high so you guys can hear what it sounds like. I don't want to go all the way up because it's a fairly large project. Okay. So we're going to quantize the drum set. Remember what again, I'm Mr. Tangent here, but hopefully remember what we did. We highlighted the first, let's zoom out a little ways. Did I actually, where's my cut? Oh, it's out here. Okay, good. So now we just have to quantize it. Okay, we turned on, everybody saw that we turned on stretch for the kit. We're going to go back to the sequence window. Now, remember my temporary tools trick that I always told you about? If I double tap the W key, tap, tap, I can highlight the entire kit. That's very useful for audio editing. Whatever's visible in the window, I need to grab everybody. I want to move them or crossfade them, double tap the W key, and it's a temporary group. So now I'm going to go to quantize and 16th notes. Yep, and I'm going to quantize the beats within the soundbite. And no, I don't want to change the durations. I just want to change the attacks. And let's do it. Apply. I can see that they moved. So we're going to listen to the drum kit here. And so let's solo the drum set. I'm going to, in my world, if I hit the S key, it'll bring up solo. Now, I don't know what's currently being soloed. But if I option click on the drum set, they're all going to be soloed. So let's just see. He comes in here 4 on the floor on the kick. Check this out. Take off the click. 2, 3. It's tight, very tight. So it's working perfectly. So now I mean, again, like sometimes you get lucky in life where a particular set of mics and drumming is clean and you can quantize it perfectly. Let me undo just so you guys can kind of hear what it felt like, because you haven't even heard the before. So we start around bar 31. He does this 4 on the floor, and you'll know right off the bat, and we're not picking on the drummer, but he's a little off at the beginning here, kind of getting into the groove. So let's undo. So we're going to undo. Now, the interesting thing about the way they set this up is when I undo, I have to undo each of those drum tracks separately. It's not considered one undo entry, which is interesting. I wanted to ask the developers about that. It should be one move, but it's actually, you know, as many moves as there are drum tracks. So here's the drummer completely unquantized. And I'll go ahead and listen to this. I'll turn the click on so you can hear how it relates to the click. So you can see things like, you know, here's bar 35. If we go right to the bar 35, 1, 0, and we zoom down, look how that kick drum, he's a little ahead. And it's, you know, it's fine. We're all human beings. No one's perfect, you know. But let's say the reason why we might want to actually get this really tight is so that we can add loops. You know, that's obviously a very popular production technique, is to, even if it's not like a loop, it's more of almost like a ghosted kind of production thing to give it some more life. So let's actually go and requantize it. So well, let's back up one more time to make sure everybody saw what we did. I'm using my temporary tool, double tap W. I've selected it. I went up to audio, and we went into audio beats. We went to copy beats. We picked the hi-hat as a good representation of the kit because of the bleed. We hit copy. So now all the drum tracks are sharing the same beat lines as the hi-hat. So that way when we quantize it, they're coming from one source, so they stay phase accurate. Everything stays nice and linear. There's no phasiness and craziness to it. So now we're going to quantize it. So it's still highlighted. I go to, and I forgot to mention we have to turn on stretch. Notice how I haven't turned on stretch for the rest of the band yet. I'll get there at some point. But I tend to want to work on different elements, and I'll stretch them. And now we're going to quantize. And so we region quantize. We're going to quantize the beats within the soundbite to 16th notes. And I hit apply. And you can see him move. So now let's hear that first part when he comes in. The 4 on the floor kick is nicely lined up. So I have a loop here in stylus that I want to actually put as a little tiny layer underneath this, just to show you, like, well, okay, why would we want to quantize that? Well, let's put this underneath. It's a little, not the greatest loop example, because I would probably want one that maybe didn't have a snare, but the idea is that sometimes you'll want to conform elements, you know, the stuff to the grid so that you can use loop-based stuff and everything's nicely tight and you don't have to, you know, everything will not phase and flam. Okay, so we've successfully, and again, now I would kind of move left to right, and maybe I could do with this particular drummer, I might be able to do a larger section. So let's get risky here. Let's jump. Let's do maybe something like, I don't know, this many bars. Let's just arbitrarily go out here to about bar 40, the end of bar 48. I'm going to put it right before the downbeat here. And remember, if you select all, Option Y will cut at the wiper. Option Y cuts at the wiper. So now, is my temporary tool still being used? It sure is. Great. How do I release the temporary tool? I'd single tap the W key. So I single tap, it's no longer selected. And I want to re-enable that temporary tool. I double tap W, tap, tap, everybody's selected. I'm going to go up to copy beats. And we copy beats, and we said hi-hat, and we hit copy, and we go to quantize. I already know that stretch is turned on. 16th notes. Cool, let's see what we got here. Oh, I still have stylus kind of in there. So I think stylus is actually a little grumpy. So now we can move through this, and we're able to tidy up and get things going there. So we're going to kind of continue to move here because that's just doing a drum set, but I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page there when we copied it from one element of the kit, and then we're able to quantize that. And so that's a quick way to get through get through a drum set, and again, working your way left to right. And now I've got quite a few other examples that we're going to get into. So let's do that. I'm going to close this project, and we're not going to save. Command D. And so here's a tune that we can get into doing some guitars, stuff like that, basses. Here's some guitar strumming. Okay, so let's get into that. We're going to go into the sequence editor, and I've got my track selector over here. So you can see I'm looking at my drum set. I'm just going to option click on strum so that I can just add to those. You know, whenever you have a bunch of tracks selected in the track selector, option select the one will just select the one only. And so that's a very quick way now of it having to deselect things. You can just go option. And so now let's really zoom in here on this. Where do these guitars start? Looks like they don't start till bar 12. Okay, now look, what's interesting is I can see that it's analyzed the beats. You can see those shadows in there. Let's actually make this even bigger. If I hold option and resize one, they both resize. So let's just make sure that background processing is doing its thing, which I'm sure it has to be. It's definitely already analyzed the audio. Well, now what am I using for the stretch algorithm? Let's just take a peek. Okay, look, yeah, it's set to a lower one. It's efficient best. We can set a little bit higher. And now you're probably asking, well, what are these defaults for these are project specific. But remember, if you work from a template, you could set that in the template. So, and that's kind of a good thing, I think, that it's not a global setting, because each project you might have a different approach, and some are more demanding than others, and so you might kind of think of it differently. So you can always build it into your template if that's going to be kind of a default for you, but you're going to change it sort of project to project from the preferences, pitch and stretch window. Okay, pitch and stretch playback, we've kind of increased it to a higher algorithm. Offline is very, very high. It doesn't have to be quite that high, and we talked about that. So now we're in done. Let's solo the guitar for a second. We're going to, again, S is solo in my world. Look how the guitar is not soloed. So I'm just going to hold option and click on play. I'm going to add this guy, and what does it sound like? Oh, let's turn on the metronome. It's on. Okay, so it's just kind of this cool, kind of got this lazy kind of rhythmic vibe thing going on. And you can see, you can tell right off the bat that this is kind of a 16th-ish kind of thing going with it. So if I turn on my grid and I'm on 16th notes, then you'll notice, like in DP, I'm going to be snapping. As I move my wiper, look how I'm referencing every move I make to the wiper is snapping. Look up above. 12-1, that's the second 16th note. There's the 16th note, 16th note, 16th note, 16th note. And I'm looking down at the audio and going, and seeing kind of where things land and going, things are pretty tight. Like, let's see where he kind of starts getting a little off, or he's a little ahead or back. So far, he's playing it pretty cleanly. Oh, there's one where he's kind of anticipating that. You see that little shadow there? It's kind of probably hard to tell on Zoom, but you can see that here. There's definitely going to be some improvement here if we can clean this up. But and this is something I love to do, is to get a sense. It tells me two things. How far am I really off from the grid, from the performance? And is this a really good syncopated value to be referencing it with? Because, it turns out like 16th is too much detail. He's really kind of playing more of an eighth note thing or a quarter feel. And so, again, your results, you're going to get not so good results if something is very simple and you're telling DP to think of it as something that's a lot more detailed. And then the opposite is true. Sometimes, and actually, believe it or not, and we'll get into this, sometimes in situations where somebody's playing something 16th, it'll ghost the syncopated notes. So sometimes it's actually even better to quantize it to like eighth notes. And so it'll quantize those anchored eighth notes and let the 16th in the middle of it be kind of sort of ignored. Because chances are it's probably the space between those two eighth notes, it's going to work itself out. It's not going to be a problem. You're more concerned with anchoring those eighth notes than you are concerned about cleaning up every 16th. So this is all kind of, it's almost like the science and sort of art of quantizing audio. It's not perfect. It's never like, you have to get in there and really learn how to use it. So we're just going to look at this a little bit more. That's maybe a little bit early. So, but are we going to be able to clean this up a little bit? Yeah, let's just see if we can get it to super tight. So what do we have to do now? Oh, first thing we're going to do, by the way, when I turned on stretch, I remember how I went back to the tracks window and I can turn it on right here. You can also do it like this. This little the three menu, track selector menu, click, stretch. Click, stretch. So now those are enabled. I just turned them on right from the actual track view. Yep, they're on. Go back. So let's highlight it, and we're going to go to quantize. And digga 16th, yeah, beats infinite. And it moved. So what do we have? Let's listen to it. It's grooving. I mean, it wasn't super far off, but if you're being super, cautious about where everything's sitting, because you've got all these different layers and elements, and if it's a little off, it could ruin the groove. But here's the good news: like DP did all this work for me. Okay, I didn't have to really go in there and say, no, you made all these mistakes about where it thought the beats were. Now, for those of you who have been DP users from the time that this was first put in the program, this is a pretty big step up. And it's not like I'm saying, oh, that old version was terrible. It wasn't. It's just that the guys that worked on the way that DP analyzes the transients and determine what are the beats and how does it, they did an excellent job. And then also in their defense, like they have this incredible algorithm to work with. So it's just guys in offices working with sandals on for 1,000 hours a day. So, but look at what we did though. I mean, what DP has done a marvelous job. And we're going to talk about how, if it needed to have cleanup work, where do we do that? And we can do that in the Waveform Editor. And we're gonna get into that, I promise. So I'm gonna undo both, and you can see there's definitely wiggle room here. We talked about, look, even that one right there. Look as we move left to right, and so again, it didn't have a swishiness. Like the audio was clean. It was clean because my stretch playback was set pretty darn high. Let's actually see for fun. Like, what is that going to? How much is the processor right now? Let's just open. You'll notice in my world, I don't dwell on the processor very much. I used to be that guy who was like, oh no, the processor. No, you know what? I'll know if the processor is too high, and I'll feel it. I'll feel the DP lagging, and then I'll know, oh, what's going on in there? But I don't dwell on it because I just psychologically I'd rather work than think about the processor. So Shift Y, of course, is the processor, and it's sort of anchored in here. If I double click, I can rip it out of there. Let's put it up. I don't like to really look at it that much, but let's just see what's the difference. I mean, we'll test it together. Let's put the real time all the way up, and let's see how taxing it is. And I'm at 48 kilohertz, 32-bit floating point, 512 buffer, pretty kind of a high or mix playback kind of buffer setting. So let's see. And by the way, I don't think we actually quantized it, so let's re-quantize it. So all I have to do is hit apply. It's in there. And I'm gonna hit play. And I'll bring up Shift Y. See how pre-gen is now I'm not having to enable anything. So this is where, and so what is pre-gen? Pre-gen is actually calculating and using the disk and using the RAM to actually buffer and play back what's needed for the processor. So you'll notice that there's a real-time component and there's a pre-gen component to this. So let's just for fun, let's turn on cache and see like what would that alleviate in terms of playback. It's not going to be a problem. I mean, it's just that it's using it. So let me go to the consolidated windows for a minute here, and let me pull audio performance out. So whenever you select something in DP, you have the choice of having it be a part of the consolidated window, or it can be floating and separate. I don't want it to be up there. I want to really have it be completely separate. Okay, so Shift Y, there it is. It's on its own now. And we'll pull this down just a little bit so we can really get a good look at it. And let's watch it go by. Okay, so what would it buy us back in processor if I turn on cache? CSH, turn it on. And then let's just see if it's going to be a little happier. No? Oh, you can see that there's the cache meter itself. So yeah, pre-gen's doing its thing. It's doing its thing. And so what would happen if we go back to our beloved pitch and stretch and we go down to something a lot lower in quality, like efficient best, which I think it defaults to efficient best, which is really a good bang for the buck in terms of quality and efficiency. Let's see what this one's like. Oh, let's turn off cache too while we're here. We're getting kind of in the weeds here, but you guys are going with me on this. It's Friday. We have to do all these strange things. We have to. Oh, look at that. So yeah, it was a lot less taxing to run the lower algorithm efficient best. But then, hey, nothing but the best for our client. So we want to bump it up. And if the computer can handle it, then we will. So we're going to close the processing window. So, but back to the big picture, which is, they've dramatically improved how DP analyzes the beats. They've done an excellent job with that. And then with this algorithm, So remember, we talked about once. Now, by the way, you notice I didn't have to copy beats. I didn't have to, because these are just guitars. Okay, anything that's not having to deal with phase. Okay, anything where you have multiple mics on a source, you have obviously the time delay between mics and sound getting between the mics. So if you stereo recorded a harp, you'd want to be concerned with phase. If you stereo record really any instrument, you have to be concerned with phase, but these are just mono instruments. So when I went to quantize them, I didn't have to think about like, oh, where am I copying the beats from? I just went straight into quantizing them. So remember that. DPs analyze the beats. You hear a percussion part. Oh, I can fix that a little bit. Now, we're going to talk about the stretch feature. And so it ties into the beats. But let's do this. Let's go to the fretless bass part. Yeah?
Matt, before you do that, we had a question that went by earlier that while we were still looking at those better and best settings. Mm-hmm. You were talking about which one was being used at certain times and which might be used for bounce to disk. And Gary Norman had asked, would you switch this setting when you bounce to disk?
Yeah, and I was under the impression, full disclosure, I thought that the most expensive algorithm was used when it bounces to disk. And the developers said, no, believe it or not, the bounce to disk is a real-time path. It's a real-time thread that happens in the processing. So no, so it's not bounce to disk.
Even with the offline button checked?
No, and that brings up another point. So if you go to offline, and here's what he's bringing up. If I select these and I go to Control J, and I deselect offline, actually, you know what? It's real-time regardless. It's real-time regardless. But here's an option that when you have offline enabled, that's default. That's a faster than real-time bounce. Okay, and that's when we do our mix, and 99% of us all will do our mix. We're going to do an offline bounce. We change, we set it to AIFF or MP3 or broadcast wave, and we hit return. It does it quick, faster than real-time bounce. And so, but if some people say, hey, I want to be able to do, I want to listen to it as it goes down in real time. So that's what this option's about. It'll just bounce it, but it's almost like, remember Pro Tools for all those years where you would just listen to the bounce? That's what it's like. But it's still not going to choose to use the offline resolution.
To get the highest quality bounce, you would have to set those settings in the preferences then?
Yes.
You have to go back to the highest quality one before you did your bounce?
You would have to go back to playback and set this as high as possible to enable that. Or like we talked about, for now, I just want people to be aware of the fact that they set it, this is the playback, and we want to set it nice and high so that when we do our bounce to disk, we get the best quality algorithm. And I don't want you guys to think there's a tremendous difference, because to be honest with you, they're all very, very good. But, check them out, and you can always change it on the fly. So as we're working, I go, well, what does it sound like with, and by the way, when I actually switch that setting, I don't have to redo anything. It's just looking at the different algorithm. So that's a really cool way that they implemented it. So let's go to the fretless bass part. And then let's do our little trick where we're looking at 16th notes. And let's kind of go down here and let's move the wiper. And you can look at this, da 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 da. And DP has done all the beat work. It's done perfectly for me. It did one thing that it missed right there. Did you see this? See how it missed this guy? Okay, well, why did it miss that guy? That's an interesting question. So why don't we clean this up a little bit? Like manually clean this up. Now, sometimes, believe me, when I first got this and I was testing it, I was kind of trying to beat it up and going, well, what if I gain this up? Well, then will it see it? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. So this is a good example of how do we fix this? If I'm going to quantize this bass part, I don't want it to really necessarily ignore this. Note, this is a significant note. It's a ghost. It's ironic that this one right here. Now, before we actually do any kind of manual work, let's just see if we can fix that by going up to, we're going to highlight the bass part. We're going to go up to audio beats, and we're going to find the beats. And now let's play with the sensitivity a little bit. Let's see if we can force it to find that. What's interesting is it kind of renders that, and we go, let's go all the way to the top. It's still not seeing this as a beat. See? But I don't want this guy to be left out of the party, so we're going to actually deal with that. But how do we deal with it? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make a cut right here. I'm just going to cut this area, and I'm going to Command Y to cut that region. I'm going to click on the audio region, and I'm going to Command double click. Command double click, or how about we right click and open in the Waveform Editor. Command double clicking on it will open in the Waveform Editor, or I can right click on it and say open in the Waveform Editor. Open in the Waveform Editor. And here it is. Here's the Waveform Editor, and we've kind of revamped this now in DP10. But what we're going to do is we're going to switch the view. You guys see where I am here? I'm going to go to the bottom of the page, and I'm going to go to Audio, and I'm going to switch over to Beats. So now look what it's found here. It showed me these beat handles, and it's these green markers indicate the beats. So I'm going to click right there, and I'm going to use my pencil tool, and boom, I just added a beat there manually. And so now look, this isn't really necessary here. This is like da 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 da. Oh, that's not really something I need. I'm going to highlight it, delete it. Okay, this section we're not even going to worry about. This one, looks like I can probably also eliminate. Well, actually, no, I'll undo that. It might be he did something in the bass that's sort of I shouldn't say that's actually, I'm playing this bass line, but and that's why I probably could use a little love here on the quantizing. So this one here too, I guess let's just leave it alone because it looks like it is halfway between. Sometimes you're doing, this looks like a 16th note. It's maybe a muted kind of a non-tonal note, kind of a muted thing. So, but look what I did though. What did I do? I simply, wherever I put, the cursor, I can just hold the pencil tool and I can just insert a note. So this is, again, we're getting into the science and the art of doing beat detection. And if it's a really important project, chances are DP's done a really good job on most of it, if not all of it. And once in a while, you're going to go in there and say, oh, it couldn't really see that as a note. It really couldn't, for some reason, it just didn't. And so, because again, depending on a number of factors, but all is not lost. We went into the Waveform Editor. Let's do it again, just to make sure everybody saw what we did. We go back to the sequence window, and we hit save. And so where are we? I think we're out here a ways. Let me see, where's my cut? Okay, here it is. I'm going to control drag the wiper. I look at there's that waveform, that beat's been drawn. It looks good now. So how did we do it? Command double click. We open up the Waveform Editor. There it is. And now we're going to go to the bottom, and we've got all these different things we can get into. We can look at the pitch, the beats, the tempo. We can do the stretching. We can do a whole bunch of stuff in there. But we're going to go to beats. And I'm going to go through here, and I'm going to insert. And again, wherever see the wiper, see where I am with the white insertion. P for pencil will let me actually draw in a beat. So that's how you would do that for things that don't have beats. But again, that's not going to be super often. So now let's quantize what I did here. In fact, let's quantize the bass part up to that point from bar whatever 12. So da 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 da, and let's just see how accurate I was here. So far, it's pretty on the grid. Oh, that's a little bit late. Okay, that's right on, right on. Okay, this isn't going to be doing any major changes to the timing, but it's just going to get it right. Kind of. Let's see. There's probably going to be some significant ones here. Okay. Looking through here. Okay, it'll be interesting to see what it does with that. I think it's going to land on a 16th, so I think it's going to get absorbed. Okay. Yeah, I mean that guy's late. See, look, this is look at that. That's late. All right, well let's do it. So we're going to go to the little menu here. Stretch is turned on. I'm going to go up to quantize, 16th notes, apply. Let's see if we do him on his own here. This guy, let's just continue on our way, quantizing this bass part to 16ths. Cool. I mean, it's going to be nicely, tightly on there. And again, how does it decide between what might be a little bit of a slide in versus the actual hard pick attack or finger attack? It's doing this for us. It's actually, we're not having to really think too much about, what is considered a slide in versus a note. And this is obviously quite attack based. And I wanted to mention one other thing here about this, that if we wanted to do some processing to these different bass parts, we could cut right along the beats. Remember how we talked about this in the previous webinar? If I turn on, you guys see where I am at the upper right? I've got my beat grid. So now I take the scissor tool, which is C, and I can just cut right along the beats. I can cut right along the beats. So you can always do that. You can always cut. Let's talk about a situation where we're not going to quantize it. We're actually going to use this new stretch feature in DP. So I'm going to undo, and we're going to unquantize what I did there. And let's go back, and I'm going to unquantize all the way back before I made the split. I think we've gone all the way back. Save. Oh, we can go back before I even made the cut here. So I'm going back through the undo history in DP. and before I even fix that one note. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look, as we come in here, I want you guys to see how would I lay a little part back? How would I just do that as we get into it here? Let's find a note where that's our beloved didn't find, but we're going to skip him for now. Let's look for a note, like look at this right here. This right here, this note is late. It's pretty late, okay? So let's not quantize it, okay? We like the vibe of this player, but we just think he needs a little adjustment here, a note here and there. How do we do that? It's really easy, actually. Watch what I do. We switch from sound bites to stretch. So what stretch is going to do, it's going to show all the beats, but now you're going to be able to grab it with the hand tool. Okay, so beats and stretch are really the same thing. I'm just looking at a view now with stretch where I can just grab it. So I can say, well, let's just pull him forward just a little bit. So this is where, and again, we're all trying to figure out how to get the best performance. And so sometimes you've got something where somebody's playing and they're really feeling it, and you don't want to quantize it. You just think there's a couple notes here and there that they're just a little off. Okay, it might be a better way to do it than actually quantizing it, would to just switch over to the stretch layer. It's already found the beats, and remember, if it didn't find the beat, we could go to the waveform editor and we can add the beat. We could pencil it in. So now what's cool is I'm in stretch layer and I'm going through this going, that's right on there, that's really good. And so this one, oh, he's just a little late, so we're going to pull him to the right. And this is really cool. And again, it's using that algorithm that we picked, a really high quality one. And now I'm not having to make cuts. I'm just going through this manually, because this record deserves this kind of attention. I'm going through it, and I may quantize it. I might just go manually and fix a note here and there by using this stretch layer. You guys with me? Should we pause for a few questions? Is everybody kind of with me? How are we doing?
There was a question about whether you can use stretch on group tracks, like if you're doing a drum set. Would they still use like the reference of your hi-hat like you used in the first example, or would they have to be done separately?
It's a good point. Like, let's say I have a drum set, and I pick the hi-hat as a representation, and I copy the beats from the hi-hat to the entire kit. Now I switch to the stretch layer for the entire kit. If I move one thing, are they anchored together? No, they're not. They're not actually anchored together. Does that make sense? So you're probably going to want to use quantize for that. But what I could do just as easily is highlight this and say, well, this needs to be moved. Let me actually quantize just that one beat, right? And then we'll go together. So let's go move on back to our other examples. Oh, piano. I've got some piano stuff that we're going to get into. Cool. So we're going to go into, we've talked about fretless bass. We did some cuts. We talked about strummy guitars. Let's talk about the piano. There's a piano solo, it's very rhythmic here at the end. And I'll play a little example of it here. So I'm going to put it in solo. And I don't know what's currently in solo. I don't want to have to think about it. So I'm just going to option click on play. And remember, that's like a way of whatever state solo's in, I'm going to override it and I'm going to put that instrument in solo. So that's a true solo. So where am I? Okay, so I'm going to play the click. And listen, this is sort of the piano's playing off the beat. Ba ba da 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 da, kind of a thing here. And it's an acoustic live Steinway piano. It needs help. It definitely needs some love. So this would be a good example of, and so we're going to do our trick. Remember how we know that the syncopation of this is da 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 16th notes kind of thing. So now we're going to look and we're going to go through this. Go look right off the bat. The very first thing's late. Da. That's good. 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 That's a little bit early. That's pretty on. A little bit late. And so, oh wow, look at that. That's like late. That's really late. Oh no, it's late. Okay, so let's fix it. Let's do it. And again, acoustic piano, here's the good news though. Look at the shadows. Like, it's done a good job of finding this, except the very first thing. Go figure, right? The very first note that's played, it did not find. Why didn't it find it? Well, we don't know. So let's take a quick peek at it in the waveform editor. Okay, I'm going to hold Command. I'm going to double click. And we're going to actually zoom in here, because we're going to zoom in here all the way down, and I'm going to actually put in a beat, and I can see in here it's done a good job on all this other stuff. It really has. But for some weird reason, I'm going to actually have pencil in that first one. Okay, cool. Again, art and science here. Sometimes we have to do a little bit of manual love to get it in there. But I've got it in there. It's ready to go. So let's actually do a little edge editing on this. I'm going to toggle the grid. I'm going to turn it off by holding Command. And we're going to slip right up here to where the piano comes in. We'll do just a little crossfade just in case. Save. And so we're going to highlight. And now is stretch turned on? Well, we're going to check. By the way, if I didn't turn stretch on, watch what happens if I don't turn stretch on. Let's say I forget, right? I'm going to quantize this to 16th notes, okay? And I hit, okay, yeah, 16th notes, beats within the soundbite, apply. Watch what happens. It's going to start rendering the audio file, okay? It's going to start rendering the audio file. Look, remember we talked about Shift R, background processing. So that's the way that DP, 8 and 7 used to operate, was we had to do everything like this. We had to kind of, oh, you want to time stretch something? Okay, well, now you have to have it, match the sequence tempo, and you have to quantize it, and you have to do an offline. So that's what we actually did now was let me go to the undo history, make sure that I'm not quantized here. And so now, because we have the new stretch markers that are basically the beats, we can do all this stuff in real time. So we don't have to wait around. So now we talked about the piano part. So let's go and turn on stretch. We're going to highlight it. We're going to go to quantize, 16th notes. Now let's watch it. So you guys can kind of tell like what's happening here. Let me put the bass in with it so you can kind of get a feel for that. Cool. I mean, it's tight. It's right where it needs to be. We've got the piano, and again, I didn't want you guys to get the impression that like it's all this work, because it really isn't this work. It might miss a note. It's like, well, what was it about the note? Was it the timing of it? Was it the velocity? What was it? How much energy? It's so hard to say why. If you're in a situation where it doesn't see it, should it see it? Maybe it should see it, But if it doesn't see it, can I get around it? Yeah, you can. And that's true of like 90% of the things in DP. Like if you see a roadblock, hopefully you can find a way to, there's 100 ways to do about everything. Well, exaggerating, but usually you can find a way to get through a situation where, and so in that case, we went into the Waveform Editor and we penciled in the note, it's quantized, we're on our way. So that's cool. I mean, that's really clean. I've got the piano nicely quantized, and I didn't mess up it didn't become mushy or kind of stretchy and aliasy sounding. It totally clean. And that's an acoustic piano. Yeah, we have another example. So we're going to close this. We're not going to save. And I've got, let's get into the Terry Woolman project. Because we love Terry, producer, artist, guitarist, extraordinaire. And he's got his great show that covering his artists. So he gave me an audio example of something he's working on. I think it's a live Wurlitzer. Okay, whatever it is, it's got a nice tone to it. So he said, well, it's 102 beats per minute, and it's been a challenge to quantize. Look, what do we need to do? How do we make this happen here? What do we need to do? So I imported his project. I set the tempo to 102, and we're looking at it here, and DP's done a good job of analyzing it. And I can tell, let me play it for you. This is unquantized. Let me make sure that it's the only thing playing. It is. Okay, so here's what it sounds like with the click. Now it's to me it's vibe, it's got some soul. But if we wanted to really say, hey, let's put it, and then this might be a really good example of, you can see when he does this very first thing that comes in here, it goes da, ah. So you can see the last one I would maybe not even quantize. It might just go into stretch and go, you know what, dot dot. Let's make sure that stretch is turned on, and dot dot dot. Let's just lay him back a little bit manually. Let's hear it. Yeah. So I would do this with quantizing. Maybe I would just go through it and go, he's got vibe, but he's got a few little things that he's anticipating. Maybe too much coffee. So we're going to switch over to, we're going to undo what I just did. But let's actually get surgical about it. Let's quantize this part, because I want to make sure that you can see that you can actually do it. By the way, remember how we talked, I want you guys to understand something. When DP analyzes the beats, that's what the stretch is. The stretch and the beats are the exact same things, okay? It's just that stretch is a way to get in there and grab things, okay? That's all. You can't do it in this window because you're dealing with the audio. So it's a separate layer, okay? Go into stretch. Oh, cool. I'm going to move this beat a little earlier, later, and it's fun. It's flexible. I mean, to think that like audio is elastic. It's like MIDI in a way. It's like I'm grabbing things and changing things. So, but let's quantize this. So we know that we're in 16th land, da 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 da. So let's just test this. So he's pretty late on that. He's right on the money on this. He's definitely a little on top there. And then this is like a little ghosty thing he does that probably the downbeat. We're not going to worry about it. A little bit late, right on the money, a little tiny bit early, and so on and so forth. But let's not get into the details. We're just going to make sure that stretch is turned on. We're going to go to quantize, and we're going to quantize the attacks and the beats within the soundbite to 16th notes. We're going to apply. Let's hear it. Now watch when I do my little test here where okay, right on. Okay, moving left to right. Everybody's just should be right in there now. So what I did now, and we're going to listen to this cue, is I put like a little drum kit stylus groove underneath this, just as sort of a bed to listen to it. Yeah, it's right in the pocket to a. Right on the grid. Perfect. I mean, so it didn't take any effort, Terry. I wasn't up all night. Oh, I couldn't. He sent it to me like 5 minutes before the presentation. So, and it wasn't work. It really wasn't. It was just bring it in, put it at 102, add the little stylus groove, and then analyze it and look at it and go, you know what? I don't have to do any work here. And again, it's all about whether we would want to use the stretch and manually fix a couple notes. We wanted to. So now what I might do with this, let's say I'm pretending I'm the producer now on this. I might just highlight the entire performance and then just shift it. So I'm going to go to Command L, and I'm going to shift it later by 10 ticks. So now it's just a little bit on the back side of the pocket. Now let's just see. It's quantized, but it's just got a little bit more feel. Let's see. Maybe that was too far. And that's what's cool. We've quantized it, and then we can obviously shift the whole performance a little bit later, put it back in the pocket. Or maybe we would, so we've got all that control over it. And then I wanted to bring up that quantizing may not be the right approach. I just want to kind of hammer that home where it might be better to switch to the stretch layer and then just go da-da-dee-da. And come up here and go, this guy, he could be, why don't we make him a little late on that? Let's just see for fun. Yeah, let's just make that even a little bit later. Yeah, see, that feels better in the pocket. And that's not the 16th note. That's just groove, right? That's just who knows what. Questions? What do we have, Glenn?
Someone was asking, I think Jeremy was asking, if you freeze drum tracks after quantizing, should they consider which setting to use for pitch stretch at that point?
Well, remember how we talked about freezing and bouncing are real time. So right. Yeah, pick the better algorithm so that you commit it. By the way, this is an important one I want you guys to understand. Let's say we've done all this work on this audio file. Okay, we've got the Terry groove happening and it feels good. Okay, now if I want to give it back to Terry, how do I write in all those changes? How do I do that? Merge the audio file. Now I could bounce it. In fact, I'll give it to Terry just for fun. I'm just going to highlight this. And if I bounce it, let's just say Terry, example, mix, example. And I'm just going to say here bar 1. So he knows that he can, at 102, it's got a free bar up ahead. And so now when I bounce it, which is obviously going to take like 0 time, it's going to be unbelievably fast. It included, obviously, all of the beat stuff that I did, the stretch stuff is all written into the file. But the other thing that's cool is if I just merge the file into itself, audio, merge, now when it re-renders the file, it's going to write in those changes. So let's say, you're in a mode with DP where you're committing things, or, I'm going to give it to you and you're in DP and I give you the audio file, but I want to make sure that pitch correction, you know, crossfades, cuts, edits, trims, all the stuff that's not plugin oriented, it's not volume related, it's not pan related, but all the stuff that you can do to the digital audio region, like change the pitch, change the beats, change the stretch markers, all that stuff's going to get rewritten in a merge. Okay, I want to make sure that that's super clear. So I give it to Greg Prestipino, he drops it in his session, and it's everything's perfect. He's got it exactly right. So, or if he's using DP and I use DP, I could just send him the project and then he can modify it from there. You know, he can go, well, that was good, but I want to change it a little bit. Go for it. You've got everything. When he opens it up, it'll obviously bring up the exact settings that I had. And so that's a cool thing. All right. So everyone cool with that? That's a good example, Terry. It's a nice little groove, by the way. Dig it. All right. So we're going to close this. And we're going to go on our way here to, oh, yeah, you know, just a couple minutes on this one. This is a little bit more quantizing audio stuff. And another project here. Oh, let's do a shaker. You know, it's like, well, I mean, it's not like the world's most exciting thing, but you should see how we're going to quantize a shaker. And then I've got a bass guitar part that I want to show you. It needs a little bit of attention just for a couple minutes here. So let's go into the shaker. And remember how in our track selector, we can just option click on shaker. And where are you, Mr. Shaker? I don't even see you. Here it is. Sorry. Okay. And I don't think the shaker comes in all the way out to bar, whatever this is, you know, bar 115. And let's just solo the S and option click. And so we seem like we're always in 16th land here. But if we've got the grid set to 16ths, you can see that, you know, we have quite a bit of variation here. This is a live played shaker, you know. And look, that's early, that's late, pretty much on. Because this shaker's interesting because we talked about shaker has energy before attack. Shaker is, you know, shaker has energy before the attack. And so how does it deal with it? How does it's good. Like when they're programming it, they're looking at all these different types of audio files and where does the energy rise and what's considered attack. And if we quantize it, it's done. You shouldn't have to be thinking about this. You're just be focused on the music. Let's just put it that way. That's late. That's late. I mean, look, I'm late. So let's just cut to the chase. I'm going to switch over to stretch. It's already on. I'm going to highlight it. And we're going to go, yeah, just quantize it. Let's just get this going here. Let's take off the metronome.
We're not hearing the shaker. At least I'm not. I'm just hearing the click.
Here's hearing the click. It's quiet. So let me give it some love here. Let's boost it up. Let me look at this. The shaker's fairly quiet. Okay, so I'm going to use byte gain to byte gain it up 6 dB. Actually, we can go up a little hotter. Let's go up 8. Okay. So now see if you can hear it.
Yep. There was a question earlier about quantizing to either a shuffle or swing beat. Could you try doing that with this just to see what that works, how that works?
It's not a world great example.
Yeah, okay.
Well, but you know what? I think it's a good suggestion. I mean, certainly you have access to all groove quantizing settings, any swing settings. This is just played in such a way that, well, let's see if we can find another element that we can actually swing a little bit. It's a good point. I think there's another one that we can get into. Well, let's do this. Let's go into the congas and the clave for a minute here, and let's just see what we have for this too. Let's solo these. And again, with swing stuff, if it's played a certain way, it might be a better approach to go into stretch and to just manually fix a couple things that are anticipated and stuff. I just want to make sure that people understand that I want people to have the mindset of, you know, there's a way to accomplish it, and it's going to take me a few steps. And as you start doing it, you'll be really fast. It's like everything in life, you know. It's just you'll try it the first time, and it may not work perfectly, and you're just going to have to learn. Okay, how did it analyze the beats? Where am I copying it from? Am I going to need to manually enter any kind of beats? You know, there's just factors that I want to make sure that people understand. That's all. And so let's just hear this. Well, this might take to swing a little bit. It's worth a shot because it could be more of like a da 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 da. You can see it's kind of a straight kind of vibe, and it's all live. So let's do that. Let's see. Well, let's not worry about the clave right now. Let's just focus on the high and low conga, and let's see if we can Depending on how they were mic'd, it'd be interesting to see. I don't remember. I'm sure they would have been played at the same time. Looks like there's certainly bleed that happens on the high conga part, on the low conga part. Let's confirm that. Yeah, they're played together, obviously. So let's see what happens. Oh, I didn't have stretch turned on, so I'm going to undo so that I can stop that process. So let's make sure that we're... So that's okay. Yeah, let's kill the background processing tasks. That's fine. So let's go to the undo history, and let's go back before we actually quantize this. Save. And we can kill that task. That's right. Okay. So because I didn't have stretch turned on. So I want to, again, I don't want to have to be rendering things. I want to be able to do things in a fluid way with beats via stretch. So stretch is turned on. Stretch is now turned on. So now, cool, I'm going to close the the right bracket on the right side here. Command or Shift right bracket will close the sidebars. Shift right bracket closes that sidebar. Okay, where were we? Okay, cool. We're going to try to swing some of this and see if we can pull that off. Let's see. Now let's make it a little steeper. You know that.
Yeah, put it at 100 just to be extreme.
Well, I would never swing something that dramatically, but
so it obviously works.
It can work. It needs a little love. It looks like, you know, what's interesting. It looks like I would want to copy beats in this situation. Does that make sense? Because of the bleed. You see, when I did those independently, I could hear a little bit of artifacts there. You can tell it's going to do the swing. You know, I'm not. I mean, yeah, I want the swing to be what feels good, but I can already tell that, you know, there's enough bleed that these really need to be seen as one entity. Does anybody have a quick question while this is loading? Charles, did you have a question?
Yes. Beats, working with beats and grids in like 12/8 time.
Mm-hmm.
How does that look?
I mean, just, you know, view it as eighth notes, or, you know, pick a common denominator for, you know, 12/8 eighth notes, you know, top, up, up, up. So in other words, don't get caught up in the meter, just get caught up in the subdivision. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like just view it as eighth notes in that case, or it could be sixteenths, but, and that way, you know, you can, because a DP is going to be sort of meter agnostic. It's just going to be thinking about the rhythmic value.
A sort of same question, but a little different slant on it. Let's say you're in 4/4 and you're playing a shuffle. Mm-hmm. You're not trying to turn something straight into a shuffle, but you're playing a shuffle. What do you think? Quantize to the quarter note and let the shuffle.
Yeah, see, and that's where, you know, we should do a round 2 on this with more intricate swing and shuffle values and stuff, because, you know, hard to say, like you said, it might be better to let those in-between values kind of do their thing. And really what you're focused on is the drummer or the percussionist has done a really good job. There's just a little bit of pushing and pulling. It's just a little off. But the space is pretty good. And so maybe you anchor, like you said, larger subdivisions like eighth notes and quarter notes and see where things fall. You'll just have to do that. Because sometimes if you're going to be asking to actually perceive each of those little shuffly things as separate events, you're going to drive yourself crazy. I mean, honestly, and that's what I'm trying to get at. It's like, if it's played shuffled, by the time you get the beats analyzed the right way and go through it, the drummer could have laid it down in like 3 minutes. See what I'm saying? You know, just be aware of that. Like, pick larger values and see where things fall in those middle sections. And then sometimes, you know, we're all in situations where we'll just be manually cutting drums and shifting things. I mean, it's all about just getting it done, you know. But I think, you know, these tools have gotten much, much better, and you'll have to just play and see.
Yeah, things like the strength and options in that quantized window gives you lots of variations on that. So things don't have to be as rigid. Not just the percentage, but the swing, the bottom 3 where the randomize and strength options are. A couple of the questions, Sandor still didn't. I'm not sure if you found him on your chart.
I found him here. Hi, Sander. Cool.
My question is, I often get audio. I work with a lot of live audio recorded on stage, multi-track, and I often get files recorded on hardware that might not have the most sound digital internal clocks. So I find that something may have been intended to be recorded at 100 BPM, but for whatever reason, when the file gets to me and I ask Digital Performer to find beats and analyze tempo, there's fluctuation, variation, or maybe the file's just too short, or for the actual to line up with the conductor track. If I try and sync it up with 100 BPM or something like that, is there any way to have Digital Performer say, okay, well this file's supposed to be 100 BPM, just make it 100 stretch that out to be 100 BPM?
I think we're going to do an entire webinar on kind of conforming audio to, let's say, a grid that's a non-conventional grid, or taking audio and conforming it to a different tempo. I mean, we're going to kind of do that with this, but I guess it's interesting. If you go in, you remember how in DP, like if you can always go up to audio, soundbite tempo, we can actually set the soundbite tempo. So if we know what the tempo of the file is, we can tell Digital Performer what the tempo is, and then when we turn on stretch and we change the tempo in DP, it will use those stretch markers to actually have it now follow the new tempo, if we know what the tempo of the file is. So that's a way to, you have a whole section here on getting into soundbite tempo, whether it's analyzing the tempo, and again, like your mileage may vary in terms of the content. If it's not recorded very well, it'll definitely try to come up with a tempo, and then you'll have to see if whether or not that's something that you can use. And then of course you can get into things like clearing it out and reanalyzing it. Sometimes, I mean, even in situations where what you may have to do, and again, we're going to do a whole webinar series on this. You've got a live performance of something, you drop it in DP as audio, you tap tempo, and you really kind of feel it, and you can maybe fix a couple little mistakes where you're putting in the grid, and then now you've got.
I guess what the problems I'm running into is taking this audio and then trying to sync it up with different various video sources that were recorded around the venue, and the digital clocks on those may have been better or just different, and so the duration of my files are coming out to be different lengths. So it'd be nice to be able to say, oh, take this audio, make it because I have part of the audio tracks I get is a click track, and even if I analyze the click track with DP, I can see that the audio file, the interface that recorded the audio was not the best quality, and the tempo does not come out perfect.
Yeah, I guess I can't think of one instant, like very quick way. There's no like set of tools that will just kind of conform it. You'll have to decide, you'll have to analyze the soundbite tempo. You'll have to use maybe beats or a tempo map to do it. The only thing I guess what does come to mind is you know how in DP you have scale time, and sometimes that actually is pretty magical, like where something is just, you go up to region and you scale time, and you're able to time scale something by the very, like literally like 1/10%. Something about the timing of audio, it's just a little short or it's a little long. It's not in, now obviously phase is a huge deal with what you're dealing with. You can't, you have to get things get in, but you're going to have to just play with time stretching, with beats. There's no sort of one quick way, unfortunately, that at least that I know of. I mean, that you can do that.
Matt, I agree. I think some of that just gets into be quite a surgical procedure, but probably breaking up a longer performance into smaller chunks and working on smaller sections would make that a little more manageable.
I think so too.
Yeah, I tend to set markers around each song in the performance, and then work within the songs themselves to get them synced up. Because if a set is an hour long, it's just unrealistic to work with. The file sizes are huge, and the operations become a bit unmanageable, but also the discrepancy in time gets longer and longer as the as the length of the file increases.
Yeah, it becomes cumulative error at that point. Yeah.
Well, one nice thing about Stretch is that you're not having to render these files, you see, and that's important. Like once you have the beat markers and you've gone through, and that might be a good thing to do is to go through and try to like clean up the beats for those different, if you have time. I mean, and then when you're doing changing tempos, you're not rendering. It's just looking at the stretch markers. So it should, you know, you're not having to wait and wait and wait and wait. Oh, that didn't work. Undo, wait. It's just all on the fly. But it brings up a good workflow point, though. Thank you, Sander. Steve, did you have a question?
Yeah. I was wondering if you could address how to even approach a more macro example. In other words, instead of beats, what I'm trying to do is remaster and conform classical music to an already time-altered and edited version of it that was through MP3 sounds awful. So I'm trying to get a better sounding, you know, redo of what I don't even know what has been done. But what I'm needing is a much more broad adjustment of tempo. So I'm looking for a way that I can lock the altered version so it doesn't change, because I have to conform. I have to match these unknown tempo changes that have been made already to it from the pristine new copy of it. The editing was easy, and I've tried doing some things where I'll cut it up, and as you were mentioning, take the hand and just time stretch.
Or scale time. Did you try scale time also?
Well, but scale time is I did, but again, what I have to do is compare it to what's already there that I don't want to change. In other words, the first version that is awful on MP3 or whatever at one point, that's the master I have to conform to. So the editing was easy. I sliced up, cut up, did all the editing. But of course, the tempo, being classical, varies all the time. There's no fixed tempo. I don't know what the tempo is. And the tempo has been altered to fit the dance piece. So I'm almost looking for the ability to, you know, speed up and slow down just the new track to have it all start lining up with the original.
Well, you know what? Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah.
Now here's something, because I'm going to show an example where we have live orchestra, and I'm going to just be able to change once everything's been analyzed and I've got stretch enabled. I can just create a tempo map in DP. And you know, so let's say even if you don't know the tempo, that's not important. Like an arbitrary starting tempo of 120 can now still be modified. You can still speed up in terms of, you know, literally like 1/100ths of BPM in order to make things get a little bit faster or slower as you move left to right. Does that make sense? So once all the beats have been analyzed and stretch is enabled, and now it's a question of getting things to line up, maybe now it's better to deal with anchoring the thing that stays the same, it might be the MP3 reference, and then turning it off so it's not being affected by tempo. And then everybody else is now following the tempo map, and I'm speeding up and slowing down the project. Or maybe I'm not speeding up during the duration of a song. Maybe I get to the end of it and I do a very quick little tempo change to compensate. And so...
How do you anchor that original?
Here's how you anchor that original. Let me show it to you real quick. I'm going to... It's a great question, Stephen. I'm going to mute you and I'll walk through that.
Thank you.
Yep. If I turn off stretch, let's say this part here called low hits is the reference track. That's the MP3. I don't want it to be affected. It's going to stay anchored. Okay. These are set to stretch. Now watch what happens when I alter the tempo a little bit. If I increase this up to 61, you know, now these audio tracks are going to change in their reference to the original. So I can just do little tempo changes. In fact, let me undo that for a minute. Go back to 60. Here's what I might do. If I go into the MIDI, the conductor track, okay. Now, right now we're at a very fast tempo, but you can put in conductor data. Like for instance, if I go to Shift G, this is the conductor track, and I can start with let's say we start with an arbitrary number. Let's say we start at 120 because, you know, again, we don't know the tempo, so we're going to start with 120 and we're going to start it at bar 1, beat 1. Okay, so now you get to the end of the piece, which is bar 10, and you're going to do a very subtle move here, and we can pencil this move, although we can be very, very accurate about it by looking at it in the event list. So the event list is where you're going to look through this, and you're going to be able to leave the first one anchored and then be able to time stretch the others to a very specific tempo value. So obviously as you go faster, it's going to make it go faster, and then slower values are going to slow it down in those gaps. And it's worth a shot. You could use markers too, to kind of visually see as you try to fill those gaps. And it's just, unfortunately that's just difficult, time-consuming work. But like you said, the good news is that the algorithm is going to sound great when it does time stretch it. And you do have things like the beat analysis that's going to help you. And then either we talked about using things like scaling the time or anchoring them with stretch, and then being able to change the tempo. And when things are anchored to stretch, when you change the tempo, they're going to speed up or slow down. But they're going to sound, it's going to sound really good. And if you're doing just a little tiny bits, no one's going to know. And it's not going to change the pitch. That's the most important thing. It's going to speed up or slow down, but it's not going to change the pitch. That's the key.
Matt,
yes.
Jim Cooper wants you to unmute him for a second.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to jump in, Matt, because it sounds to me like what Steven is basically asking to do is to conform this high res recording with the low res one. And I think a great tool for that is this third-party thing called VocAlign.
I've used that before as well for single vocals, but not for multi-track things.
Yeah, it might not do so well with like a full stereo recording, but it might. I don't know. I haven't tried the latest versions. Maybe they have a good way of doing that, but that might be one way to approach that, is to try VocAlign. Just want to throw that in there.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it's really designed more for monophonic, but maybe they've really upped the algorithm, and maybe it'll do that kind of work. Like you said, it's worth a shot. I mean, I think there's a trial period that you can check it out for a couple weeks and see if it works. Okay, but I do want to show this example here. This demo is going to be about tapping in a tempo here for this MIDI sequence. So let me just mute these audio tracks and let's just play it here for you. So, it's a very kind of slow, lumbering kind of tempo, and it would be nice for there to be a tempo map. And instead of drawing in a tempo map, tapping in a tempo map is a very musical way to do this. So I want to show this because it's a cool thing that you can do in DP. So let me actually jump back here to when we opened the project from the undo history so that I know exactly what state I'm in here. Okay, so let's do it. Let's do this together. How do we do this? We're at 60 beats per minute, very slow tempo. I'm going to double tap at the very top on the clock icon, which is slave to external sync. Double click, it opens it up, and we've got it set here to type of sync, tap tempo. We're going to tap tempo, and I'm going to use here my Roland digital piano as a MIDI input source. Obviously it has keyboards. You can maybe see it here in my video. C3 is fine for now. I can deal with that. Okay, so we're in conductor track. I've got the conductor track armed, and I'm going to turn on slave to external sync, and I'm going to turn on the metronome. So we've got, remember, we went to slave to external sync. We chose tap tempo. I'm using my Roland keyboard. We're going to use C3. And I've got it set to slave to external sync. I've got the MIDI conductor track armed. And now I throw it in record. And it's going to wait for me to tap C3. So we're going to do it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Picking it up. Going fast and slow down. And that's enough. We'll just kind of stop there. And so I want to hear the performance. We're going to take it out of record. We're going to rewind to the beginning. Let's save. It's good to save. We're going to take it out of slave to external sync, and we can turn off the metronome. Okay, so now here's the cool thing. All of these audio tracks, and these are just basically, like you can see, low hits, these ping kind of hits, and these gong rolls. If I play enable them and I've got stretch turned on, they will follow the new tempo. So let's check it out. Oh, you know what? It's not following because I've made a mistake. I'm not putting the tempo control in the conductor track. Okay, that's my bad. Let me play it back from the beginning. And by the way, visually, let's look at the conductor track. Shift G will show me this. So then this is where we can use the pencil tool if we wanted to maybe have this kind of come down in a more kind of linear way. We could pencil it in that way. Cool. So it's really cool that you can conduct in and tap the tempo and have Digital Performer play. Now, if it's just an audio only session, obviously it can't time stretch the audio and follow you in real time. So you want to have a MIDI elements in your score that are playing, because MIDI will follow you in real time. So you can see this is a hybrid, half MIDI, half, well, more MIDI, but basically a hybrid score of MIDI and audio tracks that are following the tempo. So that's a fun feature, tap tempo. And I wanted to direct you to MOTU TV. That's our YouTube channel that has I slow this down, and I get really deeply into how you set up using tap tempo with DP10, using the stretch feature. So that's cool. The last example I want to show you, and we'll open it up for questions, is a live orchestra where we're going to use the ability to change the tempo using the stretch feature. And again, like, that's such a sort of a unique place to do it, and as a live orchestra to really see how good is the quality. And you'll see that it's hopefully you'll like the sound quality of changing the tempo. So we're going to open up this project. It's a fairly large project. This was recorded in Budapest with like 47-piece orchestra. In fact, the composer his name is Amedeo Orsini, and our friend Massimo Sami, who's the orchestrator in Los Angeles. He's a very talented guitar player and composer. He did the orchestration work. So you can see we have some MIDI tracks in here. And we know these MIDI tracks, they got conformed into audio tracks. So I kept the MIDI around in case we needed to actually reprint the MIDI, but we've closed that up. And so now we've got, when we did the recording session, we decided we're only going to use live string players and brass players, and we did all the pianos, harps, and percussion with samples to save money. And usually those can sound very, very good. So what we have here is a full orchestra, and we've got, you can see, the decatry, all the individual spot mics for the orchestra, and of course the percussion track. So you can see this is at 64 beats per minute, and so now we're going to just change the tempo. And I want you guys to hear how good this sounds with an orchestra. So let's actually go to the track selector, and let's not worry. Let's look at the orchestra tracks, the orchestral tracks, and we'll zoom out a little ways. And you can see there is some automation that I have. I'm boosting up the flute, the woodwind, and this section. And so what does it sound like? Let's play. We'll turn it down a little bit. Okay, I'll turn off the automation. What's really scary is that I'm changing it on the fly, and it's not even glitching on this laptop. So I started at 64, that was the original tempo, and as I'm punching in numbers here, it's updating the tempo across the live orchestra on the fly without glitching. And listen to the sound quality. So which algorithm am I using for this? Let's go look. Under pitch and stretch, I'm using not even the world's best algorithm. Let's bump it up a hair. And let's just try it again. We're at 65. Slower. Oh, that time, it's a lot of change. So these are pretty big jumps, but now at 85, listen to this, up from 64 to 85 beats per minute across an orchestra. Listen to how clean it sounds. So now this kind of begs the question, well, the orchestra didn't do a retard at the end of the piece, but we can draw one in, so let's do it. So let's go into the conductor track. We're going to go to Shift-G, brings up the graphical editor, and you can see this piece has one tempo, which is the tempo slider. So let's put it in conductor track, and I'm going to use the pencil tool. P for pencil will let me pencil in the first tempo, which we'll play. Here it is. We're at 64 beats per minute. And now we're going to go to the end, and let's see if we can draw in a retard here. Let's do that. Okay, so it already is, you know, in fact, let's pick up the tempo a little bit in general. And so this is what's so great is we're never having to think about the original tempo. We're now in a musical mindset. We're thinking, okay, what tempo do we want to be? And let's go to the end and let's figure out. So let's do that. Let's pencil in the ending here. Let's slow it down a little bit into the ending. That's going to be very, very slow. But let's maybe just go a hair slower there. And let's back up a little bit. And let's maybe start it a little bit earlier. And then let me not use a freehand because I don't trust myself drawing here. Let's do something like a parabola. And let's just stay starting right here. Let's just have it start slowing down at the end. And let's see what it sounds like. By the way, I don't have to stop and render anything. It's just going to play back in real time. So obviously I'm kind of too far out here. Let's start the retard much, much earlier. Okay. That's actually a better. Let's see. I mean, to be able to do that with digital audio, and again, we're not stopping. Everything is very fluid. Everything is, you know, very easily changed. And so, you know, I think now the lines between audio and MIDI are kind of blurred. It's so easy to switch the tempo for digital audio. So let's open it up here for questions in general. Mark, did you have a question?
So when we were talking about time stretching, you know, where you're actually taking scale time, you know, scaling time, often I'll record, let's say, a guitar with double mono recordings so that I can really play with phase and, you know, get the 12th fret recording. But then I want to stretch the whole thing. And and I realize I can now use the, you know, the newer algorithms, but is there any way now that you can do multiple tracks using the visual scaling time?
You can't scale time by grabbing the edge of, you know, it's something I've asked for. You know, the workaround is to, you know, there's a couple of different ways to deal with that. You can scale time with multiple tracks, and if they're the same percentage, they stay, you know, phase coherent, you know, phase aligned.
Yes.
So that's definitely the workaround, and you know that's under region scale time, and so that's the way for. By the way, for those who are listening, obviously, if you have multiple vocal tracks or multiple guitar tracks, and you want to extend the release of them, right? And you cut them and you highlight them, and you go to scale time, and you say, hey, make you 100% the current value, right? So you say, well, 110%. You hit return, and it makes them all 10% longer. But I think you might actually get into is to get into the idea of just turning on, you know, getting a tempo map, you know, turning on a tempo for your project, you know, referencing a tempo for when you record parts. And then once you turn on stretch, now you can just simply change the tempo and it'll play automatically.
Sometimes I'll have maybe 40 or 50 tracks I'm working with in a particular thing. I use large choral pieces, and I want to just stretch a couple of, you know, maybe all of the parts that somebody flew in from LA, let's say. And I want to just, because they're a little, you know, not quite in time. And I would just love to be able to select a bunch of them. And I know that I can do it using a percentage tool, but being able to do it visually was really helpful.
Yeah, sorry, you're cutting in and out. But it'd be nice if when you created a group, that time stretching was a part of the group. But for the time being, like you said, what you might do is also you can always turn on and off. Like you wouldn't have to stretch all the tracks. You could just stretch the LA tracks. So, you know, but for now, like you said, when you use scale time and use percentage, that's the only way to do multiple tracks currently. Oh, hey, Ross, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question and a comment also. That just going back, there was somebody talking about trying to align a lot of audio and video. and or video from audio, and you have to be careful. I know I've had that experience doing live recordings, that the frame rate is very important to make sure that you have selected consistently. It's either non-drop or drop, because if you don't do that and you're recording audio through a camera and audio through an audio recorder, they can really shift radically. So you got to make sure that those are all conformed at the same time. That was just I've ran into that exact problem. So just my 2 cents on that. And then the other thing is that I've been doing a lot lately where I'm recording a band live without a click track, without free time. Just saying, okay, let's play. The band back the old way of doing it. Drummer click, 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 start.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the most challenging thing that I still find in DP, and it may just me be, is going from there to creating a brand new, click track, finding the beats, creating a click track to that band, which is obviously now going to be shifting radically between beats, let alone measures and sections, verse, chorus, etc., so that I can now get down to stretch and everything else that I want to do with it.
Well, let me just jump in here for a second, because we're going to wrap up here.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's a good question. We need to do an entire webinar on this concept. Yeah. In my experience, we have a few ways where you can actually literally, once it analyzes the beats, you can use those beats as a reference for bars. Where we have something called adjust beats in DP.
Right.
This is where you can anchor down beats or beats within bars to a visual reference or beat indicators in audio files, right? So you can kind of work left to right, and you can kind of start making a tempo map, a grid based on an audio performance. But it takes time, And for me, what I find personally, this as once you record the audio, do a save as, merge all the sound audio from the same left edge, bar 1.
Yeah, and always start at the beginning and move from left to right. Once you start going back to earlier measures and adjusting beats, you created a nest at that point. Yeah.
Well, and then what I'm getting at is that when you tap tempo, because inevitably you're gonna and then what that's going to do is it's going to save you an hour of work, because you're going to basically just listen to the performance. You're going to go, the drummer's going doom, God, doom, and you're just tapping. You're listening to the drummer, and you're creating a tempo map on the fly, and you've saved yourself a ton of work. Now, when you're finished, you save. Now you've got a tempo map that's more or less what the band played, and now you're going to go in there and tidy it up. I was a little early. I didn't feel that turnaround. I didn't feel that fill. I didn't, and you'll fix it, but you'll get the most of the work done with tapping.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the tap tempo is a better way to approach it rather than
just to start. I think just to exactly, because you're gonna you played in the group, so you're gonna kind of know what you guys did. You're gonna be able to. And what's great is that when you tap tempo, you can pick a MIDI source, and you'll just kind of rehearse it, and you'll just. I did this once with it's amazing, like you said, with live players, Pink Floyd. How much give there is and take.
Yeah.
But cool. We'll get into that though. I appreciate it.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Someone wanted to know what speakers you're using.
So I've got the Blue Sky speakers, the 8-inch speakers, and I also have the Atoms and the Oratones. Everyone's got to have the Oratones, right? So yeah, the Atom A7s and the Blue Skies. The Blue Sky is a 2-1 system with a sub, and I'm a big fan of mixing with subwoofers as a reference when you want it in and out, so you can really hear the bottom end for doing cinematic, film-oriented mixing. Okay,
wait,
so
just a quick jump in. We've had a bunch of people the other day that were asking about, they're using laptops or wireless keyboards that don't have a number pad or number pad. I saw just the other day that OWC or Mech Sales has a battery operated matching, looks like a Mac one, for under $20.
Perfect.
Just a separate number pad, Bluetooth.
So on Amazon, just type in, computer numeric keypads. There's, like you said, USB versions. There's Bluetooth versions. There's battery powered ones, and they're usually pretty inexpensive. Yeah. Greg, did you have a question?
Hi. Yeah, it's actually maybe a little bit off topic. It's regarding ZTX use in multi-mic pitch shifting. Mm-hmm. I've had to do recordings whereby I've had to retune like a single flute played, in a room where you've got maybe 15 mics, mm-hmm. and the only solution I've come up with is using the relative pitch shifting rather than
Absolute.
absolute. Does the absolute it analyzes each clip or each soundbite on its own? Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think I see what you're getting at right off the bat, because when you've got all this bleed, you've got all these mics, you don't want to have any phase issues, and so you don't want it to make a determination on absolute that's different from one mic to another. So
exactly.
Your idea of using absolute and being able to say, well, look, everybody's centered on, let's say, the root position. And now if I can, and you know how if you cut, and you've done this obviously many times, where you can transpose things by sense. And you know how when you're using, how when DP, when you transpose, you're given the choice by creating a new soundbite, or you can transpose by using pitch automation. And so if you use pitch automation, you can go up obviously diatonically, or you can go up in sense. And so is that how you've been doing it?
Well, for this particular job, it's more a case of drawing a line essentially on each link, copying that that relative curve to every single mic channel, and hoping that it would apply that. And it seems to work perfectly well. But I was just wondering, would there be a way of kind of forcing all of the other mic positions to reference the analysis done on one clip or one soundbite?
It's interesting. That's a good question. Or it'd be interesting if we could create a group where if you had something where you had all the mics that are all bleeding over, and you wanted to create them as one sonic entity, and you're actually transposing one element, but you've grouped it, and now you've got a group attribute that recognizes pitch. And it would be something we could try to add. I mean, we could definitely ask the developers about it. It's a good suggestion.
Yeah, it's only in the situation where you've got to handle multi mics.
But that definitely is a good thing to know. And thank you for the feedback.
Okay. Oh, thank you. This is great.
Cool. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Michael? What about the cache that you were talking about with pre-gen cache? When would you want to use that, and when would you not want to use that? I didn't really catch that.
Okay, cool. Let's just switch over here to DP for a minute. Let me go over and just bring this up for a second. So you know how when we talked about when you go into the preferences under pitch and stretch, and we're dealing with playback, right? Let's say when we're turning on stretch, it's basically playing in real time, and we get to pick what quality the algorithm is for ZTX. So, we usually start you off in a lower kind of fairly efficient but good sounding, version of ZTX, the algorithm. As you bump up, let's say, you've got a fast computer and you don't have a million things going on, but you'd really like to make sure that when you're making these changes that you can hear it to the best of its ability. So as you move up the ladder here for playback, it's going to cost more to the actual playback of the computer and the processing. So what you can do when you're using something higher, like let's say we set it up to standard good for playback for the current project, I hit done. And now if I turn on cache, when you're parked, DP is going to render, and whatever is going to be needed to actually do that algorithm playback for those tracks, it's going to store that into cache. And so it's not going to call on the processor in real time. It's going to get that data from the cache. So only, I guess, so you're asking when to use it. If the computer's fast enough, honestly, you'll notice even with the orchestra, I didn't even have it on because it wasn't even that demanding. But in some situations, you'll want to use something very, very high quality, and it's a good idea. Turning on the cache will kind of alleviate the amount of processor that you're using.
Okay, that makes sense. One more question. Last time I pulled up an old project of mine and had massive amounts of missing files. The only way I was really successfully able to get DP to find the files, I knew where they were. I just wanted to see if DP could find them, was to restart the project and then find it from the pop-up menu that pops up when you have missing files.
Missing audio
but
file,
I could not get them to pop up in sound bites, and I looked through the manual trying to find that, and I couldn't find it. How do you find a missing file in the sound bites window?
Well, one thing that I always do, and I think we kind of went over this last time, and I want to it's a good suggestion. It's a good thing for us to kind of recover, which is go to the Soundbites window. Shift B is Soundbites, and when we talked about there's lots of different ways to view things, names and so on, sampling rate, what's in the project, and we talked about disk. Okay, and so what's interesting is when you highlight the disk, you can look at the sound file information, or you can just simply look right off the bat. Okay, all the files from this project are coming off my internal Mac 8 HD, which is an SSD, nice fast computer. And so sometimes you'll notice as you come in here, you'll have multiple drives. Or you'll notice right off the bat, everything that's missing has an X through it. I was like, those are all the files that it's complaining about. Right. So now it's a question of going and finding, it shows you the file path, you see? Sound file information, and we're going to open up in the sidebar. And so let's just see where it says here. Look at the file path here. This is saying it's in my user, MLP, desktop. It's in the audio files folder pertaining to this project. But you're going to see from the sound file information where it's pointing for the other one. And so you're going to see, oh, it's on my glyph drive that's unmounted. It's in this one folder on my glyph drive, or whatever, your C drive. And so this is a good reference here, sound file information. This could just be brought up, by the way, independently in the consolidated window. And then you can just switch the view and say, well, it's missing the harp part. Well, how come? Why is it missing the harp part? Oh, that drive is, unfortunately it crashed, or it's no longer mounted.
This is more what I was talking about when you actually move the file. Mm-hmm. In this case, they were moved to a different disk, and I kind of knew where the disk was. I was just trying to figure out how to say you have 20 odd files that are on a new disk. How do you get DP to recognize that without having to find it at the beginning of when you open the project up? So from the soundbite windows are a way
that's just a way to kind of
relocate the files on the different.
Well, this was just going to be a reference to seeing where it actually thinks the file is supposed to be. This is just a reference. Right. And then likely wherever that is where the other ones live. And so then what you'll be able to do is quit DP, open up that project again, get the alert of missing files, and then locate. And then you'll go, oh, I made a note of that file path, and I'm going to go to this drive in this directory and pick that audio files folder. And then what's cool is that once you hit OK, it should relink. And then remember we talked about once you bring in those files and you'll know when you go to the Shift B, everybody's happy. There's no red X's, there's no question marks, and so on and so forth. Everything's active. And then you go to File and you go to Save As, and then you duplicate the audio data and you put it in a new directory. And then it'll collect all the audio files from all the drives to the new location. So that's a way because that's something that, again, all of us have gotten bitten over the years. It certainly happened to me where I made a mistake. I turned off the option to copy the audio to the sequence, because sometimes you're in a situation where there's so much audio you want to reference, you don't have the space to copy it to the drive, and then you forget it's off. So anyway, it happens, but hopefully that helps, Michael.
Right. So I guess I was doing it the right way. There is no way inside of Soundbites to relocate.
Yeah, not from that window, from that first window that comes up. Yep, that's right.
Right.
Cool, thanks. Yep. John, did you have a question?
Yeah, this is a real quick process question. Is there a hotkey or keystroke that I can turn on and off effects globally?
There are a couple things I wanted to mention to you in here. So this is a mix session. Let me just show all the tracks. So now one thing you can do is, there's not a lot of effects in here. Most of the effects are sort of like auxiliary tracks. A little trick that you can do when you go to the mix mode at the bottom is, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just duplicate this mix. Okay, this is something I do just as a quick. So it's going to duplicate it, and I'm actually going to come in here and I'm going to rename my duplicate Wet. Okay. So now I can just switch to a new mix, and the new mix is Bone Dry. So this is just a quick way to and there's other ways that you can come up here and you can go up here and you can, remember how whenever you have effects, so did you guys see what we did here? We're at the bottom of the mixing board, we're in mix mode, I've duplicated my mix, and I renamed it Wet Mix. So now I'm going to go back to Wet Mix. And it's going to take a second because it has to load my plugins. Now remember, you can always, the very top is the insert. We're actually going to get into these in next week. We're going to talk about using effects. So if I option click on the insert preset, I can do the entire channel. I'm going to option click on these. I'm going to option. I mean, that's a pretty fast way to globally, turn these off with 6 clicks. So click, 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 click. I went across the top of the insert preset. We have the mix mode. And so that's a cool thing that we can do. That's a couple different ways to accomplish that.
That's great. And I appreciate it. And by the way, thanks for the webinar.
Sure. Thanks for being here. We appreciate it. Cool.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Matt, just to clarify something there, even though when you're switching to an empty mix like that, or the non-wet mix, that also takes those items off the processor as well.
True.
As opposed to when you're just bypassing the mix, bypassing the effects, where it's still using up CPU power.
Some effects will bypass without DSP, and some will. So yeah, but generally, like what you're pointing out, bypassing the effects may or may not take up the processing power. But when we switch to the dry mixer, then obviously it's completely removed, which is pretty useful.
Right.
Yep.
It doesn't take up the CPU power that way.
That's right. That's right. Cool. Good point. Okay, let's try to wrap up here with maybe a couple more questions. Adam, do you have a question?
Yeah, I think mine's pretty quick. At one point when you were doing stretching and you actually grabbed a beat and stretched something, left or right or whatever, you proved that you couldn't group multiple tracks and move a beat and have them all move.
Mm-hmm.
You did that.
Well, I could do it with Quantize. I just can't manually do it.
Right. So if you wound up manually doing that, are any of those things you could copy from track to track and paste them?
Yeah, actually, we talked about that. If you wanted to, if you moved it, you could highlight just that one beat, and that's an interesting workaround you just brought up, which is, let's say you move one that you feel like, oh, that's really good. I've moved that one element of the group, but it would be nice to have the others follow that new change. And so I highlight that one, and I copy beats, and I apply them to the other parts of the kit. Not for like a whole 8-bar section, for one beat.
You would do that using copy beats as a menu item, not actually selecting it and copying it and pasting it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Not like from the traditional copy-paste stuff you would do in DP regularly, but from, like you said, audio menu, copy, from audio beats, copy beats. And then you'll use as a reference the one that you edited. And then once you hit apply, and you're only going to do it for that one beat, they will update. And that is a workaround now until maybe we can add the ability to let that be groupable with changing the stretch position of one across multiple tracks. So it's a good suggestion. Thank you.
These are great.
Cool. Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah, hi. It's actually following up on the last one. So if I have, going back to that example with the low-res file that has been put into position with a lot of work put into it, and I have my full orchestra, and I take one of those tracks and conform it per hand to the low-res version, can I then take a tempo map from that to the conductor track and in stretch mode have all the other tracks follow that rearrangement?
I think that the better way to do that, honestly, is to turn on stretch and change the tempo. Does that make sense? Like, you're not, I still think that's probably a better workflow. In other words, it's kind of echoing back there. So essentially, Paul, and what we were talking about is, so we have a reference, and then we have the other tracks, and you want to be able to time stretch one a certain value, and then use that as a guide to time stretch the others. But it's not really designed that way. Like, you can't, unless you find let's say, for instance, I go into the sequence window, and I'm looking at the soundbite layer, and I find out that when I time stretch, I time scale this one by a certain amount. Turns out that this is just a little tiny bit fast. So I go 100.1. Okay, and I hit apply, and it turns out that one is like right where it needs to be. I could just simply apply to the rest of the orchestra with 100.1, and then everybody will be phased. They're all the exact same percentage. So you could do it that way, and that would be one way to do it. Or like we talked about, even if you don't know the tempo and DP is arbitrarily at 120 beats per minute, you can still use that as tempo information, because you can still turn on stretch and speed up the tempo a little bit to make things faster or slower. And even if it's not 120, it doesn't matter. You're just going to be using it as an arbitrary value to speed up or slow down. So I still think that that's a really good way to do it, because then you're never having to do offline rendering. You're not time stretching. When I scale time, I'm basically creating a new soundbite. And that could be time consuming. And then you try it, you don't like it, you have to undo it. But if you're doing it with the stretch, then it's just instant, and you'll know right off the bat, oh, that works perfectly. So that's how I would approach that. But so we're gonna wrap up. So thank you for being here, and have a safe, healthy weekend.